Eating fresh food right out of your garden in summer is wonderful. But wouldn't it be even better if you could keep doing that right into the fall?
Well, you can. Extending the season in your home garden requires two things: protection from the wind and cover against the cold. And just like we've found a warm and sheltered spot here in which to sit, you want to find warm and sheltered spots for your vegetables.
I'm Barbara Damrosch.
And I'm Elliot Coleman.
And if you'll stick with us for half an hour, we're going to give you some tips on stretching the season in your garden.
On gardening naturally. One of the most basic and delightful ways of extending the growing season is to plan your garden as a natural windbreak. Since most of the cold winds come from the north, Barbara and I run our rows east to west and then plant our tall crops on the north side, such as these climbing melons or beans or zucchini, and they provide a couple of degrees of protection for the crops that are on this side of them. And if I get down in here, next to this bed of fall spinach, I'm more warm, I'm protected, and the conditions are better. In fact, if I can gain 1 or 2 degrees, it's just like moving the whole garden 100 miles to the south, and I get a week longer growing season. Next, I'll go join Barbara at the other end of the garden, and we'll show you a few more ideas. When Barbara and I are planting where there isn't a natural windbreak, we'll often erect an artificial one. A piece of snow fence works very well. It's light and easy to move. We can pick it up, move it into place, and quickly tie it off to supports. If this were a solid wall, it wouldn't be anywhere near as effective because the wind coming from behind would strike the back of it and come over the top, woof, 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 and make all sorts of heavy currents here. By being open and closed like this, the wind comes and is broken up into little bits and pieces, and therefore it's a much calmer area. Remember the wind chill factor. In fact, that's so effective that studies have shown that plants protected by a little windbreak like this are in a climate that's 3 or 4 degrees warmer than it would be without the windbreak. Another option you can look into is what is basically building a small greenhouse over your plants. This is a spun-bonded fabric known as a floating row cover. It acts like a greenhouse, except this miraculous fabric lets air, moisture, and light pass through. So when it's over the plants, you don't have to ventilate them because air can pass through. You don't have to irrigate them because the rain can come through. The simplest way to put it in place is to bury the edges. And to do that, I'll just take a hoe and make a furrow down alongside the bed. And we'll stretch it across, put the material into the furrow, and just put some soil over it.
There, this should hold it down.
The next level of protection beyond this would be a cold frame. A cold frame is basically a box that sits on the ground. It's open on the bottom, that's down here where the soil is and the plants grow, and it's also open on the top. In order to turn it into an excellent small growing area that gives your plants even better protection than the floating row covers, we have to put some sort of cover over it. And the cover obviously wants to let the sun come in. We're going to cover it with some glass frames, known technically as lights to greenhouse and cold frame fanciers. Now these are, as I said, glass. They could be covered with plastic or some other artificial material like that. I prefer glass for one reason, and that is the greenhouse effect. Now, this is one case where the greenhouse effect is a good idea. In fact, this is where the term came from. When the sun warms the soil, it collects heat there during the day, and that heat is radiated out at night. But that radiated heat can't pass through glass, and therefore it's trapped in here. And you get an environment that is even warmer than you would expect it could get. Also, the sides of the frame are solid, they're keeping the heat in, and it gives you a wonderful place for crops to grow. If this were a plastic cover, which is admittedly a lot less expensive, you can nail a sheet of plastic to these frames just as easily, it would also be an effective cover, but since it doesn't keep the heat from radiating out, it's only going to give you about 2, maybe 3 degrees of frost protection, whereas glass will give you about 6 degrees.
Now, of course, once you've got the lights on here, no rain is going to fall on your crops. So it's very important to water. Very simply done by just raising up the end of the light, and there you go. Now, you're not going to have to worry too much about it when in the early spring or the late fall when the angle of the sun is really low. But the hotter the weather gets, the more you got to pay attention to this and water inside your frames.
Now, the water makes your crops grow, and so does the extra warmth in here, but it can get too warm. And that's the most important thing to think about, because with a cover over a frame like this, you can cook your vegetables long before you're ready to eat them, because the temperature in there can get up to 120, 130 degrees. And that's not good for the growth of the plants. The easiest way to vent is just to open the lights a little bit. Now, most people do it by lifting them from the bottom, as Barbara did when she was watering, but I've found I get much more even ventilation if we raise the edge of them. For example, I will use a notch stick like this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different notches that allow me to raise the lights to a different height depending on the weather. And just set it like that. I move back and I set the next one on the edge of another frame. I get a sawtooth effect, and this is nice. If there's a prevailing wind, I can open these so they're away from the prevailing wind, and then the wind can't come in and catch under them and blow them. If it's a very warm day, I'll vent them higher. If it's a cool day that just needs a little bit of ventilation, I can put it on the lower notch there. Now, what I'm aiming at in the off-season, spring and fall, is to get a temperature of about 60 to 65 degrees in here. Now, that isn't as warm as you might want out of doors for summer crops, but you don't want these crops to get too soft and grow too much. You want them to be hardy, because remember, it's going to get cold at night, and this is what you're protecting them from. And a 60 to 65 degree temperature in here, which you can easily gauge with a few days practice, put a thermometer in and see how it goes and how much you need to vent, is what's going to grow you the best plants. These are not your summer crops, these are hardy crops. And with these, they don't mind a little freezing and thawing. In fact, they thrive on it. And with the combination of hardy crops and a cold frame, you can harvest out of this frame down to temperatures in the mid-teens.
We're going to talk about these plants in the next part of the show. We'll show you how to set up your whole garden for a longer season, whether you're using cold frames or not.
The best tool for smoothing soil in the garden is what's called a grading rake. And the best of them have either wooden or nylon teeth. Now, this is a model you can find in most hardware stores. Wooden teeth, wooden bar across here, wonderful for smoothing and grading the soil, but even better, since it's made out of wood, I wanted it shorter, and I just cut it off to a 2-foot length that I needed to get into tight spaces. My favorite of these, though, is an imported rake with nylon teeth, because unlike the wooden teeth, I've never been able to break these, and that makes it a really wonderful tool. In addition to that, the way the handle is attached to the head, by being screwed in like this, I can change the angle of the head, and there's times when I want to do that. I modified this one, so when I'm working in close quarters, say in a cold frame, and I want to smooth right up to the edge of the wood, I now have a rake where the handle is coming off at an angle that allows me to do just that. If I had to limit myself to one type of crop in the garden, it would definitely be salad greens. They're at their best harvested fresh, right from next to your back door. But in order to do that, so you extend the salad season well on into the fall, you have to think ahead and plan ahead. The seeds have to go into the ground a couple of months before the eating takes place. And so I do some good planning. This area of the garden grew tall peas. And as you can see, they've been harvested and taken away, because I knew I was going to replace them with some fall salad crops. But because of that, I did some thinking and planting, even last spring when I put the peas in, by putting these 2 parsley plants in. They were alongside the peas, they grew nicely, and now they're ready to add to the fall harvest. Now, the major crop in here is spinach. And there's almost no work to putting in crops like this after peas, because I remove the pea vines by just cutting them off at ground level, leaving in a little bit of stem and a lot of root. And there's a reason for that. Peas are a legume. They have the ability to take nitrogen out of the air and store it in little nodules on their roots. And by the time I took out all these vines, the peas hadn't used up all their stored nitrogen, so it's sitting there like fertilizer, all ready for the spinach. And the spinach loves it. Now, I made sure of two things. First, that I planted an adapted variety. This is one called Indian Summer, obviously well named to be planted at the end of the hot summer, get a little growth on, but before the heat's too much for it, the cool fall weather comes along. And the second thing is water. This is a dry time of year, and when you're doing succession plantings to keep your salads going right on through almost to Christmas, you want to make sure you get plenty of water onto these crops. That's the one missing ingredient. Everywhere else, the soil is plenty fertile enough. Now, another crop in my salad selection is lettuce. And I've found with this particular variety, which I like, that I have to plant it about 2 months before my first fall frost. So that's when this was seeded. That means that about that time, I'll have good-sized heads, and they'll have quite a lot of cold resistance, frost and freezing resistance at that size. They can stand here, and I can harvest them over a good period of time. But after a while, it gets too cold for them. No problem. I move on into my next selection. This is endive, and you'll often see it in the supermarket. It gets a lot bigger in this as it's mature, with the heart blanched. And that's the best way to eat it, because it takes away a little of the bite of this plant. It's hardier than lettuce. It's a great fall salad plant. And since it's blanched, it offers you a whole nother opportunity to extend your season. We're going to put a blanket over this, just the way you pull a blanket up over yourself in bed on a cold night. And the way the commercial growers blanch it is to cover it. We're going to do the same thing with a sheet of black plastic, and then we're going to put some hay, maybe some bags of leaves or something, over that to add extra insulation. Well, that blanches the heart of your endive and also insulates it from the cold. And you'll be continuing your fall salads on past any point the neighbors can believe. But the simplest way to extend your salad season is to grow a mixture of lettuces on a cut-and-come-again basis. Reds, greens, all together. I just come out when I'm ready for dinner, cut them off, put them in the basket, take them back to the salad bowl. The ones I cut this week look like that. The ones I cut last week are already regrowing. I'll cut these next week, and then I'll be back to these. Amazing production from a small area.
One flower I'm not going to worry about having to cover up if we have a frost tonight is my favorite calendulas. Unlike most annuals, they really love cold weather, and they're going to keep right on blooming for weeks, even if we have a frost, unlike these poor zinnias here, which will have had it. It's sort of a simple, old-fashioned kind of flower. The modern hybridizers have kind of fancied it up and made a lot of double varieties, but I like these simple yellow ones. Sometimes I'll plant some of these great, intensely orange ones. If I were a colonial housewife, I'd call it pot marigold, because I'd use it as a cooked vegetable. But I use calendulas mostly as a cut flower. They have good, long, strong stems. But there is an edible use for them, though. Sometimes I'll just take a late summer salad like this one that Elliot made for me and tear off some petals and sprinkle it right in there, and you can eat them along with the greens. Now, doesn't that brighten up a nice summer salad? Yo, Elliot.
Hi, Barbara. This plot's ready to replant.
Oh, looking good. One of the best ways to extend the season in the garden is by succession planting. And that simply means a plot that's been vacated gets filled with the next crop, right over where it was. In this case, there used to be lettuces all through here. There's just a few left here we haven't eaten. We've got a nice spot for something else.
Another advantage of succession plantings is that it effectively doubles and triples the size of your garden, because in a small garden, by getting 2, even 3 crops off the same piece of land, you've tripled the amount of produce you get.
Now, for these fall crops, they're going to be cool weather crops. And they're going to be things that you normally would think of as things that grow in the cool weather of springtime. So I got whatever we didn't plant the whole packet of. I got radishes here, beets, and carrots. The question is, Elliot, what we still have time to get away with here.
Well, I don't think we have time to get away with carrots. The way we calculate that is to count back from the time of our first fall freeze. Now, I didn't say frost, because the frost may come early, but these are hardy crops. They'll keep growing past the frost on to the first freeze, which is usually about 3 to 4 weeks after the first frost. And that way, we calculate from the numbers on the packet how many days before we have to plant.
So these carrots take 70 days to harvest. I think we'll have to make do with the crop we got here. But those beets down there, we could take a chance on replacing them with these beets. 50 days to harvest, just might get away with it.
Just might.
Radishes, 28 days.
They're a short
Definitely
thing.
worth a shot.
I'll leave you here to plant, and I'll go clean up the cold frame.
Okey-doke. I'll get to work. Now, Elliot has already fertilized this bed. We tilled a lot of compost in the spring, and you can still see these clamshells that have been here for several years just slowly releasing calcium into the soil. And they're going to do that for another 50 years if we leave them there. So it's all ready to go. Don't need to put anything more in. Just going to start making some rows and put in my beets.
One important consideration when doing succession plantings in a cold frame is to remember to renew the soil fertility. The crop in this frame, up until yesterday when we pulled the plants, was a beautiful tomato crop. We planted them early in the spring, and in the protection of the frame, they got off to a quick start, and they grew well all summer. But the tomato plants have been feeding here all that time, and they've taken a lot out of the soil. So in order to assure that the next crops are going to grow well, I have to add some more fertility. The best way to do this is with compost. You're just going to spread it on the surface of the soil and mix it in shallowly. Add, maybe a ½ inch over the surface of the frame. Now, if you're concerned that the preceding crop was an especially heavy feeder, or maybe you don't have enough compost, you might want to use a commercial organic fertilizer, such as blood meal or one of the many mixes available at your local garden store. The reason you would use them is because after a long season crop like tomatoes, there's a lot of root mass left in the soil that needs to decompose. Now, a little extra organic nitrogen will help make all of this happen. Remember, you have intensive conditions in the cold frame. It's extra warm, it's extra moist. Plants are going to grow well, but you want to make sure it's also extra fertile. Now, we're about to put some plants in here. They're going to be hardy plants. We're going to put some in from seed that are short season, like radishes, and others that are longer season from transplants.
Well, I got my seeds planted. What do we got going on here?
Well, why don't you put in these transplants, and I'll put some radish seeds into this frame. Let me borrow that stick from you.
Sounds good. Now, these are good cold weather crops. We've got some mustard, some turnip greens, and some lettuce. I'm going to plant these on a grid, spaced about 8 inches apart either way. Now, the reason we're growing these from transplants is that it gave us a whole 3 more weeks to keep the tomatoes in this frame. These were just grown on by themselves in soil blocks another place in the garden. Now they're all ready to go in.
I've been planting 2 types of hardy seeds here, spinach and radish, and I'm putting them in rows quite close together. The reason I'm doing that is in order to intensify the production in this frame, the way I try and intensify everything in this small space. Radish seed germinates quickly and grows and is going to be harvested and out of the way before the spinach needs the room. So I put in a row of spinach, and over here I put a row of radishes next to it. Now, why does the spinach need the room? Isn't this the end of the season? Well, yes, but spinach is a very hardy crop, and it's going to keep on growing. So after I've harvested the radishes, the spinach will continue to take over this space, and on a normal winter, we'll be harvesting spinach from this frame right on into the spring. It'll survive that long. Now, that's real season extension. Just push a little dirt over those rows, and the seeds are in there, and they're ready to go. Now, I'm going to do one more thing before I leave. I want to remember what I planted here in case these varieties turn out to be particularly good and the planting date was very successful. So I'm going to write on the stakes the name of the spinach, the name of the radish, put them in there in all their respective rows, and then everything's set. If you give your strawberry bed some extra late summer, early fall care, you can really improve production. I'm out here now cutting out the extra runners. Each runner is going to make a new strawberry plant, and if I let too many of them form, it's going to be too crowded. And if the plants are too crowded, I won't get as many of those nice, large, sweet berries I want. so I limit the number of plants that I let form. But you can do something with the extra runners. If these were an ever-bearing strawberry, one that keeps going late into the season, you can have strawberries long after anybody else. Come out here when the runners are forming with little pots filled with potting soil. Dig a hole, put them in there at the same soil depth so they'll stay moist, and then root the runners right into the pot. Each of these runners is going to make roots out of the bottom of it. That's what they're doing on the soil here. But this way, you're going to get them to root right into the pot, and then you'll be able to dig up these little pots with the strawberry plants in them and move them on into your greenhouse, your cold frame, anywhere you want to put them, and then keep that production going so far into the fall that the neighbors will be really jealous. The combination of windbreaks, floating covers, and cold frames makes season extension very simple, well within the ability and the budget of the average home gardener.
And the results are so tasty that you're never going to want to limit yourself to just summer gardening again.
On another segment, we're going to show you how to do even better, how to extend your harvest season right on through the winter.
Meanwhile, we'll see you next time.
And until then, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.